Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One mic, two idiots, and, according to our latest figures, 3 listeners. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leaks.
Before we start, Andy, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsors, Money Farm. Now, Money Farm are the largest digital wealth manager in Europe, and they create portfolios of ETFs for their clients. They're incredibly cheap and ideal for somebody who's wanting to get into investing, and perhaps for more experienced investors who don't actually want to run their own money anymore. Now, they will even offer to run the first £20,000 of any of our listeners' portfolio absolutely free if they enter the code MTTM20K into the website at moneyfarm.com. For more information, check out their website. But for now, Andy, let's get back on with the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 145 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm good, Andy. Very, very good, actually, this week.
Good. What the listeners don't know is that's about my 5th go at doing the intro. Getting it wrong. I don't know why I admit these things. That's what editing's for. Anyway.
You're so good at editing. I listen back to past shows. It's not some weird thing to listen to your own voice, but or your own jokes and laugh at them. I do that occasionally, but I confess. But your editing is very good, Andy. I listen to past ones and then I suddenly think, oh God, I hope Andy edited that bit out. And luckily you always do. But yeah, we don't do this seamlessly. We will actually do a live recording. Now, funny, I was talking to someone else about doing a live Facebook recording of our podcast, because I've seen somebody who got in touch who wants to be on the next series of the One Giant Leap podcast, and he coincidentally also has a podcast. And I went on his Facebook and he's got a live chat, and it was quite funny actually, seeing the people with the voices. So maybe we should do it, Andy, for the good of everybody else. But we'll probably have to make sure we behave ourselves and don't swear.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have to try and nail it to the first take, which we've never managed yet. But there we go. How's your week been? Been okay?
It's been a good week actually. I had my 9th wedding anniversary this week.
Wow.
So that means do you know what? Time flies. It probably feels a lot longer for my wife, but time certainly flies. So we went out for dinner, and we did a kind of bizarre money-saving version of a wedding anniversary. It wasn't intentional, but as listeners know, my wife had a birthday recently that was quite a significant one, and one of her friends very nicely bought her an experience, which basically was a meal out in a nice restaurant in central London. So she said, look, let's use that for our wedding anniversary meal. Might as well, because the meal's paid for. It was like a 5-star experience. And you know what they're like, these 5-star restaurants. They end up getting you in on a night where nobody else is in there, because obviously they must have extra food. But anyway, we went along there. It was good fun. I enjoyed it. There was absolutely no atmosphere in the place, because there was pretty much my wife and I in this place and very few other people. But no, it was quite nice to go and do something like that. We never get to go out like most parents when you've got children. You never get to go out. So it was quite nice to do that for our wedding anniversary. I have to quickly say one thing about going to restaurants that everybody likes nice restaurants, but there was one of those slightly odd moments which makes me uncomfortable when you go to these restaurants, is that the guy, you got a free bottle of Prosecco. So the whole point of this story was, we went on this on our wedding anniversary date, as it were, and it didn't cost us a penny. So that was what the money saving element was, which was brilliant. And you didn't even have to pay a tip, which I was surprised at. I thought they'd have charged us a tip anyway, but they didn't. He opened up the free bottle of cava that you got, that you got with the meal. And as he did,
it's already been downgraded from Prosecco to cava.
Yeah, so he ended up, as he opened it, you know the sort of cap bit at the top, he dropped it, and as it fell on the table, and I just thought it was quite amusing, didn't think anything of it, carried on talking to my wife, and you should see the sheer panic on the poor waiter's face as he shot a glance across to his boss, who was like circling like a hawk in the restaurant. I just think that, God, the world with
isn't it?
Yeah, and this poor guy, I didn't care. And what is it with the people that this manager's clearly got a kick out of being the important person in this restaurant and looking down on and basically waiters were scared of him. And I mean, what I'm trying not to say is like, what a tosser, but it's one of those things. I like the guy who's as a waiter and sort of really friendly, but that sort of thing is why I don't often eat in places like that, because I just find that, does anybody like that? Does anybody like being served by people who are in fear for their job? I don't know. I'm going off on tangent, but anyway, it was a nice meal. That was the point. What about you, Andy? How was your week?
Yeah, it was good. I just realised 9 years marriage for you. I've done 11, so between us, we've been married for 20 years. Obviously not together, to our respective other halves. But that's quite good, 20 years of marriage between us. We don't seem old enough, I'm going to say.
Yeah, who would have thought, Andy, when we first met we worked together, but pretty much spent most of that time in a pub. Who would have thought at that point that neither of us probably would have thought that we would have
thought we'd have found time to get married and squeeze 20 years of marriage in with all that drinking that needed to be done.
And 4 children. Yeah. Incredible. It gives hope to all those other people out there, those normal people, that you can, look, it could be you too. Anyway, what we're talking about this week on the show, there are 3 pieces this week. One of them is about savings. So we all have a savings allowance. So the amount, it's £1,000 a year, which we all have, which is the amount of interest we can have tax free. Now, there's been a press release and story that's gone out about the falling numbers of people who are saving into ISAs as a result, because obviously there's this new allowance that makes normal cash ISAs seem less attractive. So I'm going to talk to people 3 reasons why they shouldn't ditch their ISAs. The other thing I'm going to do is, this was quite interesting, it's a kind of a joint piece that came via Twitter about ditching investments. So that's another piece. And the third piece was something that was sent in by a listener who asked me to have a look at the 9 simple, I think they're called the 9 simple money rules, all on one index card. I'll explain what that is in a minute, but there's sort of 9 money rules to live by. He wanted my view on them. So there's somebody else's money rules. So what are we going to start with, Andy? You can choose.
Let's go with savings. So you're going to tell me why I shouldn't be ditching my ISA.
Yeah, so as I was mentioning just a moment ago, we all get a savings allowance now. It was a new allowance that came in a couple of years ago. So it was meant to help people so you could save some money without paying tax. And it equates to £1,000 per person. And so that's the amount of interest you can have without paying any tax at all. And then it obviously, there's a couple of extra rules to it, but basically you get £1,000. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, you get slightly less. And what's happened is it means the attraction of saving into an ISA, which obviously everything you put into an ISA is tax-free, has fallen slightly, because previously the only way to get true tax-free savings if you were a taxpayer was pretty much to use an ISA. So with this new savings allowance, the result, it seems, is that people are stopping saving into ISAs, or at least they're doing it at a lower rate. And now a press release came out to say the amount of money cash in ISAs has fallen again, and blah blah. And they pointed towards this savings allowance as a possible culprit. Now, obviously, one of the other culprits, really, I think, is low savings rates anyway, because the amount of money going into stocks and shares, ISAs, and investing has actually increased. So I think people are just getting bored of this never-ending low interest rate world. So I just wanted to give you 3 reasons why, even if you're just saving into cash, why still considering a cash ISA is a good idea. Now, the first one is, as I just touched upon, the savings allowance tapers. So although you get £1,000, as you become a higher tax bracket payer, your savings allowance drops down, because it has to equate to giving everybody the same benefit. If you're a basic rate taxpayer and you were given tax relief, then if you were given it at the same rate as a higher rate taxpayer, you'd basically be worse. You wouldn't be doing as well. Basically, it would end up being advantageous to the rich, which wasn't the purpose of it. So I'm not going to go through the rules, but basically the savings allowance tapers. If you go onto moneytothemasses.com, you can see the rules about how it tapers down. But basically, as you earn more money, then the amount of savings allowance drops. So the thing is, with an ISA allowance, that doesn't happen. With your ISA allowance, you can put in £20,000 a year, and that's irrespective of how much you earn. You could be earning nothing, you could be earning £10 million. You still have an ISA allowance. So The problem with the savings allowance, you could in fact be a basic rate taxpayer, but then you start getting pay rises, then that allowance starts to be reduced year on year, and that would make the benefit of it that bit lower. Whereas anything you've put into an ISA stays in an ISA, even when you go over to the next year, and it slowly accumulates. So that 20,000, you do that every year for 5 years, you've got £100,000 in ISAs. Well, that obviously doesn't work with the savings allowance. The other quick one is to note, the second point really, is that in the world of low interest rates, we've all got to hold on and cross our fingers, because interest rates will rise at some point. I know the mortgage borrowers out there will be cursing me for saying it, but if you're a saver, you're hoping that rates will rise, and they will do at some point. But as they start to return to normality, then obviously if you have £100,000 now, if you're fortunate enough to have that money, I'm just using round numbers because it works. If that only pays 1% interest, then you're getting £1,000 a year interest, and your savings allowance is making sure you don't pay tax on that. Great. But when interest rates start to rise, and you then maybe earn 2% on that money or 3%, then what will happen is you'll end up having some of your interest, so £2,000 in the case if interest rates go up to 3%, that you will then start having to pay tax upon. Whereas if over time you squirrel that away into ISAs, then as interest rates rise, it's irrelevant, because everything that's in a cash ISA, anything it produces, will still be free from tax itself. So again, that's the second reason why cash ISAs do actually have something over the savings allowance and are a positive. The third and final one, which I think most people forget about ISAs, is that now your ISA doesn't die with you. So if you die, your ISA can be taken on by your spouse. So your ISA allowance can be moved on, and they can take your ISA investments. It can take a while to occur, that sort of transfer and everything. So we won't pretend it's complete perfection, but they do maintain their tax-free status. Of course, allowances in the tax world die with the person when they unfortunately do pass away, so your savings allowance will disappear. So that means any money that was benefiting from that savings allowance, when you pass that on, say to your next of kin, your wife or your husband, then that money will therefore then become liable to tax, as in accordance with their own tax situation. So there you go, Andy. There are the 3 reasons why people should still consider a cash ISA if they are thinking of saving money.
Good stuff. So savings, on to investing. You had some questions via Twitter, was it?
Yeah, I had 2 questions, funnily enough, from via Twitter within about half an hour of each other just earlier today, which is why I thought, do you know what, it will spark a good piece. And the first one was from Warren. Now, Warren's written to me before, so
wasn't Warren Buffett, was it?
It wasn't Warren Buffett.
Looking for a few tips.
No, I'd love to think that Warren Buffett would even give me the time of day, but Warren has written to me before on 1 or 2 things, and a lot of it's about investing. So all you people out there who listen in, all the thousands and thousands of you, there's a reason to get in touch via Twitter, because I'll answer your questions and it'll probably appear on the podcast. Even if you want to say hello, just tweet.
Actually, you say thousands and thousands, Damien. It has been a really good week for podcast downloads, and we've been rising up the charts. So thank you to everyone who has downloaded. Welcome to the new listeners. Please do share. And we normally do this at the end, but please do spread the word and share, because we really see it. We see it coming through in the iTunes charts. Damien gets more and more questions and people driven to his sites, and he can help more people. That's the whole reason Damien does what he does. So you can help us, can't you? It's been really good. Anyway.
No, it was good you mentioned that, Andy, because earlier this week we got into the top 25 podcasts on the business chart on iTunes, which is an incredible feat, because the people that are up there, I mean, we're talking huge
corporations like NatWest and all sorts of stuff.
The FT, all the newspapers, people like big American podcasts. We were knocking them.
The BBC podcasts, and they're all up there, aren't they?
We were knocking them for 6, which was brilliant. I mean, I love the fact that people are getting really enthused by the podcast, and we're getting more and more people listen to it. And podcasting is a great medium for people to find out about things like investing. And this is leads quite nicely on to what Warren asked me. Because his thank you was, thanks guys, keep up all the hard work you put into the podcast. It's a lifeline for investors like me, which I thought was a lovely quote. But what Warren asked me was to do with fund managers, and he said, hi guys, a well-known fund manager hasn't performed well recently. As a private investor, could you touch upon this in your next podcast? Is it wise to stay or stray, if you get my gist, for investors, it's a very difficult decision. Now, I'm guessing
Neil Woodford?
it's Neil Woodford. Now, Neil Woodford, if you're new to this podcast or new to the world of investing, there are some people who think he walks on water in the investment world. Now, his recent performance suggests that he doesn't. And actually, in fairness to the man, he has just done a video. I've not seen it. I became aware of it just before I came on air here, actually. He's done a video where he's apologised for his recent performance. Now, I'm not going to knock him for that, because to stand there and say it's not acceptable and apologise to people, I wish there would be more of a human side to investing. I think people can understand if someone tries to follow a process or something and they're generally trying to do the best by people and it doesn't quite work out. Now, this links nicely to what Warren's mentioning there about should you stick or twist. Now, I'm not a follower of managers, and I don't think anybody should. So I don't think you should ever give loyalty to a fund manager, because they ultimately aren't going to be loyal to you. They don't do anything for you. I bet very few fund managers that ever had a conscience of some kind where they really were worried about the individual investor. I did meet one guy once, and I think unfortunately he had a breakdown. So that just shows you the weight of responsibility on these people. So he was a very well-known fund manager, actually. But with what Warren's talking about here, I don't follow managers, because the reason I don't is that no fund manager will do something that works in all conditions. Over the long term, a buy and hold of any fund manager will ultimately fail. Now, you see all this research that says active funds, which are ones run by managers rather than passives, which are run by computers, the actives always underperform. Now, the reason that generally is because it is hard to outperform over the time, but fund managers tend to have a style, a bias of some kind that they tend to stick to. Now, if you think about the football world, it's very much like football managers. No one football manager or football team wins the league every year or wins every game, because they have a particular style and they don't tend to deviate from it, and then some people work it out. Well, in the investment world, it may be that what their style of investing isn't actually the macro environment, what's going on in the wider world, it isn't actually positive for what they're investing. So to give an example, Neil Woodford used to, famously in his income funds, he'd always buy things like tobacco companies, things you call defensive pharmaceutical companies, so things that people would buy regardless of the economic condition. You're going to buy drugs in terms of tablets, and I'm not talking about heroin or anything, but in terms of medication, regardless of what the economy is doing, because you're sick, and people don't stop smoking when the economy goes down the pan. So, and equally, they don't start smoking more when it picks up again. So they're kind of defensive, and he always famously invested in those things. So there was a period where he outperformed hugely, but it also coincided with periods where that type of investment style was very positive. So in periods where that hasn't been the case, he's underperformed, and we've kind of got into that environment again. And his most recent vehicles have been he's had some bad luck and, well, bad choices really, investments that he's picked that companies have done poorly, and especially in some of the smaller company stuff. But overall, he's the same person he always was, and he's still trying to do things the same way, presumably. But I wouldn't necessarily stick with anybody, any manager, Neil Woodford or otherwise. So that's why I always focus on you should review investments. So what you want to do is, if a fund starts underperforming, you don't knee-jerk and get rid of it, because they can underperform for short periods of time. But you need to set a time scale in which you review stuff. So that could be every few months, it could be every 6 months. Certainly never go beyond a year. If you're not reviewing things every year and looking at the funds, how they're performing, then I think you're going to start falling into the trap of following a manager and chasing returns when they start to underperform. So if you review things regularly and you be very objective about it, it takes the emotion out of these things. You look at the performance over a period of time and go, right, I'm going to ditch them now. I mean, with 80/20 Investor, that has been built upon this idea of regularly reviewing them, and it's momentum based. And I got asked a really good question once, was, do I ever sell funds at a loss? And I have done. The funds that haven't performed, I get rid of them. Equally, ones that perform brilliantly, I get rid of them, because it's all about what's working in that current environment and knowing when to get out of them. Sometimes you get that fantastically right. Sometimes you will get it probably wrong. But you've got to just get more right than you do wrong. So in answer to Warren's question, you just got to have a process. Whatever your process is, then don't follow fund managers, because that won't work. Buy and hold strategy over the long term of anything doesn't particularly work. It's better to review things regularly and then buy what is working at that point in time. But interestingly, I was asked another question by a money blogger, believe it or not, on Twitter, who I know very well, and they asked about Tesco shares. Now, I don't invest in individual shares. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. You have to know the ins and outs of a company's balance sheets, and it's incredibly volatile, and I would never do it personally.
It's more going down the route of gambling, isn't it? I always find with shares. I always find the people. This is only from personal experience. This isn't a general rule, but I always find the people I know that do dabble in shares are people that also like a flutter, and so for that reason, that's why I've always steered clear, because it's too much of a gamble for me.
I mean, you say that, Andy. I agree. There are people who do their research, like we mentioned Warren Buffett, and a fantastic sort of cyclical link there. But with Warren Buffett, who researches things to the nth degree, but the level of research he does before he buys something, and then he might commit to it, is incredible. But with a lot of trading, and you see some of the traders in the city, they will have some pretty hefty betting accounts as well. They love betting on football. It's in their nature. If you're, it's sort of that adrenaline junkie element to it. But of course, there are people who do value investing, who do it very methodically, and will invest in shares. But the problem is, there's always almost a missing bit of information that you might not have that is crucial to making the right or wrong decision. Now, people like Neil Woodford make those decisions daily, and that's why if you invest with people like him, he'll be doing that on hundreds of companies and investing in a whole range. And if you get some right and wrong, the damage is limited, and you hold lots of funds, then your portfolio could be invested in thousands of companies. So really, getting one wrong isn't going to be the be all and end all, and you allow them to do it. So you're picking the best of the best in terms of managers. But the person on Twitter, the money blogger, asked me about Tesco shares. They said that they've been holding Tesco shares for 8 years. I'm just having a read of it. Yeah, 8 years, and they pretty much dropped six months after buying, and it's been blah blah blah. They're sort of down. What should they do? Basically, should they stick with it or should they sell? And there was a really interesting debate because a bunch of other people on Twitter were giving them all this sorts of advice and coming up with obviously about got to take into your widest personal circumstances, etc., etc. And while that is all perfectly valid, and I do agree with that when you're giving financial advice, but I still thought, well, it's a fairly simple question, and people would really want a very short answer, especially if you're trying to do it in 140 characters on Twitter. And my simple answer to her was that all that advice that people are giving you is great, and they were sort of saying about what to invest in, blah blah blah. And my advice was, if you take the emotion out of it, so if you imagined that you were about to invest in Tesco shares today, taking account objectively all the information that's out there, would you do it? Yes or no? And if you take that kind of mindset, then you can see that if you want to buy them, then that means you really fundamentally probably want to hang on to the ones that you've got. So what it does is it removes that idea of trying to chase losses, which is one of the reasons that fund managers often fail. Most investors often fail. They chase losses a hell of a lot. So they've already gone down the pan and think, well, I might as well hang on. It's bound to turn the corner. Tesco shares may well turn the corner, and may well do very well indeed. But no one knows that. In fact, again, we seem to wonderfully do cyclical links here, because I think Warren Buffett bought a whole load of Tesco shares a few years back and actually mentioned it as one of his biggest mistakes. But yeah, don't quote me on that, but I think he did. So yeah, that was a nice link. But the point again is that you've got to have a process where you do something, and you have to be objective. So you be objective about the fund, you be objective about the share, and you take the emotion out of it, which is the emotion to think that this share is going to come good, or the fund manager is going to come good, or you really believe in them, or whatever. It's all about numbers.
Good. And if that's whet your appetite, and you're thinking you're sitting on some money and you don't know what to do in terms of how to invest it, we've got a little advert coming up for you right now, and we'll see you on the other side.
Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers and the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay, so 9 simple money rules, and you mentioned something about that you'll fit on an index card. You can explain what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'm about to. Before I do that though, I have to just point out that Andy is a man of many talents, because I had to just take a quick break there, which you didn't realise for a second. And Andy, when I came back, had basically invented his own fidget spinner using something. I don't know what you had in your hand there, Andy, but it's
a snowman rubber that I found on the table. That's probably from my daughter's pencil case, because they've just gone back to school.
I tell you what, Andy, you really are a man of many talents. So
now you've mentioned it, we've got to give the listeners a little listen. Here we go, because you can hear it. There it is.
There you go, Andy.
Don't say we're not giving the listeners what they want.
We're giving them good value, Andy. You're inventing things. It'd probably be Andy's next business idea. The snowman fidget spinner. Right, this article or idea came again via a listener, and it was Daniel. And Daniel wrote in and said, "Hi, I'm a regular listener to the podcast. I also listen to a number of other podcasts." Boo. And thought the recent Freakonomics one about money may interest you. Can't paste the link right. I wasn't meant to read that bit out, but I did. But you went to paste the link. And would be interested to see your views on the 9 money rules on an index card. Now, I went to find what this was, because I thought, what is Daniel talking about? Now, there are 9 rules, 9 simple money rules, all on one index card. Now, an index card, if you remember, like the thing you used to have at the library, before they became computerised, you used to flip through the drawers of cards looking for something to do with a book. And the story goes that there was this chap who was interviewing somebody in America, an author, finance person. I think he may have worked in finance, and he, during a podcast interview, said that people didn't really need to worry too much about money, or most of the knowledge about money could be fitted onto 1 or 2 index cards that you could find at your local library. And the way he meant it was in a just stating a fact. But what actually happened was he was flooded with people asking, well, where is the index card? So he was forced to write an index card with 9 rules of money on there. And so what the person wanted me to do was go through and say, well, what did I think of his 9 money rules to live by? And they're all on one index card. There's a photo of it. We'll put a link to it actually in the notes of this podcast, and you can go and have a look. But if you just Google 9 simple money rules all on one index card, you can find it. Now, I'm going to go through them, and they are American, so I'm going to have to translate them. Not because they're language or anything, but just because some of the things they have are slightly different. So number 1 is max out your 401k or equivalent employee contributions. Now, for that number 1 rule, what that probably translates to over here is that it's a bit like a pension. So it's the equivalent of somebody saying to you, max out your pension and your equivalent employee contributions. Now, as a rule, I don't think that's not bad. I mean, their system is slightly different, but it's effectively putting money into a pension to save for retirement. So, yeah, I like the idea. I don't think it necessarily be one of my rules. I don't think he's put them in order, but I certainly like the idea.
Can I just say, Damien, I've just Googled it, and he's got terrible writing. Just want to put that out there.
That's why I'm stumbling over some of these things, because it is, isn't it? It is pretty poor writing, but...
You'd think if this was going to go all over the internet, that he'd have got someone that could write neatly.
It went viral apparently, but yeah. So there you go. There's a lesson to you. You don't need neat writing to go viral. And one thing I would say, which he doesn't mention, but I would max out the employer contribution rather than the employee, which might mean that you have to put more money in. But when you've got auto enrolment in the UK, employer contributions into anything like pensions are basically free money. So if your employer is going to put into a pension, and it may mean that you have to put in some as well, then why wouldn't you do it? Because you might have to put in 1% and they put in 1 or 2%. That's free money. If you don't do it, you don't get it. They're not going to give you anything else in exchange and say, oh, don't worry, Damien, I'm going to give you extra 2% pay rise. That doesn't happen. So in these situations, why wouldn't you do it? It's free money, and you probably, hopefully, wouldn't miss the 1% contribution. So that is one thing I'd slightly tweak. His next rule is buy inexpensive, well-diversified mutual funds, such as, and he mentions a Vanguard fund. Now, a mutual fund is basically a fund. That's what the Americans call them. And yes, buy inexpensive, buy well-diversified. And Vanguard do make some good funds. I've done a review of Vanguard, actually, if you Google it. If you do Vanguard reviews, I think we're number 1 on Google talking about Vanguard or Vanguard Investor. I mean, they do some great funds, but the problem is they are trackers, and there are issues with trackers that they will just track and they don't do anything else. If you want to try and outperform, then you need to be moving in and out of investments. But as a general rule, I think if you don't want to do that, cheap trackers are a definite positive. If you don't want to be bothered with having to try and run your own money, then there's nothing wrong with that. The one thing I would say about Vanguard, he is American and he probably does like the idea of American Vanguard, and they are over here now and they've launched in the UK. But a lot of their funds, if you get their diversified funds, they have things called life strategy funds, and they're very popular, they're very good. I've talked about them before on this podcast, but they are very US focused, so they have a higher weighting to US equities than would be typical of maybe a general balanced fund that you might get over here. That might not necessarily be a problem, because it's been great in the last couple of years when US equities have done well, but in the last at certain points this year, US equities have faltered slightly and therefore they've underperformed. So it is a bit of a take on US equities, a little bit of a skew there, so that's the only downside. Never buy or sell an individual security. The person on the other side of the table knows more than you do about, I'm really struggling with his writing, more than you do about this stuff. Right, yeah, fair enough. That's basically what I said earlier. I don't like buying individual securities. If you've got the time, expertise and knowledge and access to research, then wonderful. But just to prove a point, if Neil Woodford gets it wrong, then everybody can. He says save 20% of your money. Why 20%? I don't know why he says 20%. Saving money is never a bad thing. I don't think you have to obsess about the amount. I think it's actually just trying to do it. Pay off your credit card bill, your balance in full every month. That gets the thumbs up from me. I think you could extend that slightly to do a bit more credit. You get some other rules off that I've talked about before. In fact, I tell you what I'm going to do next week. I've already tipped 1 or 2 of these. I'm going to write my own 9 simple money rules to live by on an index card. And I'm going to write it in handwriting that is actually legible, Andy. And then we can go through it if that's a good idea, rather than me tell you them all now. So I like that. Pay off your credit card debt. Maximise tax advantage savings vehicles like they're equivalents of ISAs, and I suppose you could have other types of tax vehicles. Now, I brilliant idea. Try and maximise all those if you can. The only thing I would say is never let. There's probably a slightly irritating phrase that you never let the tax tail wag the. What is it? I've got it wrong. No, that's it. Never let the tax tail wag the investment dog. It's meant to be the other way around. So you basically, it's such a crap phrase. It's such a typical nonsense that I would have not bothered remembering, but did just then. I don't know why. But the idea is that if you do an investment, you should do the investment first, and then the tax part and put it into tax wrappers is part of it, but it's not necessarily the overriding reason to do something. Now, to give you an example, there are things called VCTs out there, Venture Capitalist Trusts, and there's another one called EINSs. And they are basically structures that can go around companies in a way to help incentivize people to invest in smaller companies and startups. So you could get rich people investing in them, and they get a massive tax deduction of their bill by doing so. And so people who pay lots of tax might like to do it, but of course they're very volatile. That's the point. You don't do something purely for the tax benefit and then the investment is like secondary. You should be investing in something because you want to invest in it for what it is, and obviously the tax benefit of doing so is secondary to it. So that's what I would say to that. The next one, he says pay attention to fees. Okay, that's I totally agree with that. I'd extend that. I think he's talking about fund fees, but I'd extend that to fees in anything, whether that is funds, platform fees, or if you're having a financial advisor, the fees they charge. Nearly most things are negotiable, especially with financial advisors. It's just avoid actively managed funds. I think you invest in things basically because they're working. I don't sit there and go, oh, they're active, they're passive, and you sort of chuck them all out. I think that just starts to limit the universe you can invest in. I think you only invest in active ones if they're actually giving you a return, but equally you only invest in passive ones if they give you a return, because there are some passive. The worst investment probably out there is a really, really expensive passive tracker, because therefore you are guaranteed to underperform the market by a huge amount, and that amount will be the charge that they apply, and also there'll be one or two other minor factors, but there are some hideous ones out there run by some of our well-known banks, Halifax. Make financial advisors commit to a fiduciary standard. And now, I mean, that is, I think in America they have slightly different rules, but sort of standard. That fiduciary standard is really to say that the advisor has to put his client's well-being way ahead of his own. So, give an example, if somebody was trading on behalf of a client, then they would have to trade on their client's account first before they traded on their own personal one. So if they liked an investment opportunity, so you're putting them a bit ahead of you. Now, in the UK, we have quite tight regulation, as they do in America, but it's slightly different rules. I mean, that is, if you're going to go with a financial advisor, you just need to make sure, obviously, they're regulated. You know the qualifications they have. Make sure they are either certified financial planners or they're chartered financial planners. So they're the first thing I would do, and obviously they're regulated and have recommendations from other people. And the final one is promote social insurance programs to help people when things go wrong. Now, I don't fully get the workings of the American social insurance programs, but effectively, from my understanding, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but as we're not in America, I don't think it's a big deal. They have programs where they're kind of like equivalent to some of our benefit systems, but where you pay into them and you can claim on them if you maybe become unemployed, etc., based on what you've paid. You pay premiums, so they're not in effect paid out based on need. They're paid out based on the situation. So, like, you get food stamps. Someone needs to eat. They all get food stamps, but this stuff is paid out because you've been paying into it, etc., etc. So it's not an equivalent over here. But the idea I like about what he's trying to say, I think, is promote
insurance.
It's insurances, but ones that aren't necessarily in America. They obviously have other things before you get to the private stuff. So before you're trying to sell them products from wider insurance companies, the sort of social program. So over here, it could be making sure they know the benefits they've got, and like you say, looking at insurance. So there are equivalent. I like his rules. They do go across to the UK to a certain extent. I'm not sure that he was quite ambitious, which I like. Get them all on one card. I take my hat off to him. I mean, I was the guy who tried to write a book. Well, I did write a book, I suppose, that do your finances in 5 minutes a day. So I applaud anyone who tries to condense this stuff down. So yes, I like his rules. We could do different. I'm not going to say necessarily better. And to prove it, I'm going to do my own. I'm going to have to go and get one of those cards from somewhere, and I'm going to do one for next week. Take a picture and send it out, and probably be attacked for it because I'll probably criticise something to do with financial services. But we'll talk about it next week, Andy. That's it for the show this week.
I'm really looking forward to that, actually. I think you'll make a real good fist of that, and I think there's every chance of that being picked up, because you don't pull your punches when it comes to sort of saying what you feel about what's wrong in the industry and what is the right way to do things. That's good. Great stuff. Enjoyed it as always, Damien. If you want to get in touch with Damien, please do so. Twitter is probably just about the best place if you want a quick response and if you want to engage with Damien and maybe even get your questions answered on the show. And that is simply at money to the masses with a number 2. Of course, if you've got something longer, send it over by email, podcast@moneytothemasses.com. Please do review the podcast if you can, and tell your friends and family. Damien, we're done.
Brilliant. That's it till next week, Andy.
Yeah, until next week.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.